as I've said to the court before, this is, as it relates to Paul, this is one of the most difficult cases I think I've ever had to deal with, not just from the standpoint of how difficult the subject matter was here, the tragic death of Timothy and the circumstances surrounding it, but just with Paul himself, and I'm not saying anything today, really, that I haven't told Paul in multiple meetings that we've had in leading up to the trial and his cooperation here, that I view him as favorable in that he was willing to help us and to testify against his mother, which I'm sure was very difficult for him to do under the circumstances, but that I was also angry, just frankly angry and shocked and appalled at his treatment of Timothy, because he was, for all intents and purposes, the enforcer arm of this two-person, the two people most directly responsible for Timothy's death, that he was the one that would deal out most of the punishments that were directed by Ms. Vander Ark, and certainly she's received the appropriate sentence for her role in this as well. So I had mixed emotions about Paul, even up to and including the time that he testified in this trial, and those frankly continued. One of the things that we discussed at the time of the plea was giving Mr. Eldon Brady an opportunity to get the evaluations, which we now have, in an effort to hopefully demonstrate in some regard why Paul did these things. Was it a psychological condition? Was there some manipulation taking place? And quite frankly, I think, just as my feeling is there's good and bad with Paul, I think both of these assessments reflect the same thing. What is absolutely clear from both of these assessments is that whatever upbringing Paul had from his mother, and frankly from his father as well, led to him being how he is today. And that was a childhood that I think both reports indicate was marked with abuse and neglect, a very traumatic upbringing, moved around a lot, and what also rings through in these assessments is that nobody did anything to get Paul any help when it could have made a difference. So that is in some respects that's the good part of this, because it does seek to at least explain in some regard why Paul behaved the way that he did. But there's bad in here as well, and I'm sure the court will note this, but the one sentence that struck me in Dr. Shaser's report is that it says, in my opinion, Paul Ferguson was predisposed to abuse his brother independent of his mother's presence and active influence in his life. That's frankly scary. And there's other scary parts of this as well that indicate that Paul was, at least in some respect, predisposed to being essentially a bully. And that's how you could view his behavior, is that he was a bully. Now, nobody, I think, would expect any bully to take it to the extreme of actually killing a person, although certainly it does happen, but nobody would expect that was an intentional outcome that Paul sought here. And we can't lose sight of the fact that Paul didn't become this way in a vacuum, that his upbringing in some respects led to him being predisposed, as this report indicates, and I think the other report references it as well, that he was predisposed to already doing some of these things. Frankly, I think that Ms. Vander Ark took advantage of that and used Paul because she saw an opportunity to have Paul do the horrible things that she couldn't do herself or wouldn't do herself, but be done at her direction. And Paul was unfortunately willing to go along with those things because of everything that had happened to him, because of his traumatic upbringing, and because of the conditions that he did have that led to that. So it's hard to balance these things out. Certainly we did not have this report at the time that Paul pled, and I don't know that in looking at this report that the decision that was made in this case would be any different. But certainly there are things here that would have been nice to have been able to consider, but we didn't have the benefit of that. And as I told the court, I think I've told the court on several occasions in speaking to the jury, they were, in Ms. Vander Ark's case, very much impressed by, might not be the right word, but certainly factored in Paul's testimony a great deal. Believed that he was telling the truth, believed that he was honest about what his role in this and Ms. Vander Ark's role in this. So I think his testimony was instrumental in achieving the conviction that was achieved here against Ms. Vander Ark. So I certainly owe Paul that consideration. But beyond that, I certainly don't envy the position the court is in today. In balancing everything that has taken place here, the good and the bad, even in this report, and the good and the bad with Paul, I will stick to the agreement that we have made here. I will ask the court to sentence within the sentencing guidelines in this case. Certainly the court is obviously free to exceed the guidelines if it feels there's a basis to do so, and quite frankly, there are reasons to exceed the guidelines. In some respects, there's reasons to go below the guidelines as well. So literally, I think any number that the court chooses to pick here, I think would be the appropriate sentence, because I think it's a difficult balancing act that the court has to do here. But my commitment was and continues to be that we would ask the court to sentence within the sentencing guidelines. I would ask the court, however, to impose a maximum number here that is essentially equivalent to what Paul's life expectancy would be. And the reason for that is that if some of the bad that's indicated in these reports is actually present and Paul does not receive treatment for that, and those conditions that are noted here, most notably the potential antisocial disorder, essentially a sociopath, if those things are borne out in the prison system, that the prison system then has the opportunity to keep Paul locked up as long as possible. I hope that he can get some treatment inside there, but the bad in here has got to be addressed, and if it's not, then certainly Paul does represent a threat to the public moving forward because of his disassociation, essentially, from feeling empathy or feeling bad about the things that he had done. In the moment, it did not appear that Paul felt bad about those things. There certainly was a moment where he thought he needed to let his mother know that Timothy was very thin and that they should start feeding him. But overall, what comes through in these reports is that for the most part, those were absent. And the text messages, I think, even bear that out as well. That even after that noting of the fact that Timothy was very thin and that they needed to start feeding him, Paul was still a willing participant in the truly tragic and horrible things that happened in the last days of Timothy's life, including the prolonged ice bath that Paul watched over. So certainly that bad needs to be addressed as well. So again, I don't envy the position the court is in today. I will stick with my commitment here and ask the court to sentence within the sentencing guidelines. But quite frankly, any number that the court picks here, I think would be an appropriate sentence for Mr. Ferguson. I'm pleased that we've been able to achieve whatever justice we could for Timothy here in both of these convictions, and certainly the two people most directly responsible for what happened to Timothy are going to, in all likelihood, be incarcerated for an extended period of time, certainly in Ms. Vander Ark's case for the rest of her life, which is completely justified under these circumstances. So I would ask the court to, as it will have to do, to weigh the good and the bad here in these reports. And I trust the court's I trust whatever decision the court makes here. All right.